Shalom, my friends, and shalom, my enemies. Shalom to all of you. This is our old pal, Rabbi Sol Solomon, here and wishing you a lovely Shabbos morning. And what a delight, how wonderful it is to be talking to someone who's already been on this program, a friend of the neighborhood, we would call him, also a Jew. So yeah, already I like him for this particular reason. His name is JOEL SAMBERG. Let me tell you just a little bit about him. If I can find my notes. They're written left to right, which is weird because I usually read right to left. But here he is. He is, of course, the grandson of Benjamin Samberg, a.k.a. Benny Hill. And he's written one memoir book about Benny Hill, but now he's got a nonfiction novel that's also kind of based on the same guy. JOEL SAMBERG has also written for the New York Daily News and Connecticut Magazine. He wrote a biography of Karen Carpenter. We'll talk about, I'm guessing it was a very slim volume, as well as two novels, Blowing in the Wind, and I love this, Almost Like Praying, which is kind of what I do if you ever see me in synagogue. And now his book, Jackie Jester, is being published by Bear Manor Media. Here with us in the neighborhood. On our media, JOEL SAMBERG. Shalom, Joel.
How are you?
I'm all right. How you doing?
Good. Just one quick correction. My grandfather is Benny Bell, not Benny Hill.
Oh, I said, I'm sorry, Benny Bell. Of course I meant Benny Bell. I must have shaving cream in this ear. Get it. And in fact, his Joel's first book was called Grandpa Had a Long One, based on a song by Benny Bell. So first of all, welcome back to the neighborhood. How you doing? I asked you how you're doing, but you're Jewish. So how's your prostate? How's your health? How's your back? How are things?
Well, I will try not to hurt myself by patting myself on the back because of all the arthritis by saying I'm in pretty good shape.
Hello, this is good. This is important to you. So you've written quite a lot. You are a professional writer, essentially. So we know you from your novels, but you make a living or as an editor, or what is your actual writing day job, if you will?
Well, I'm right now at the age of 67, I am a full-time writer because I guess if you were to compare me against everybody on either side of the house, I guess you could say I'm retired. But I'll never retire because God gave me the need, the want, the urge, the desire to write constantly. There's nothing else I've ever wanted to do. But to answer your question specifically about a profession, quote unquote, before I retired and became a full-time writer, I was still in writing, but it was for corporate communications, corporate newsletters, editing and writing, all kinds of speeches, and anything for the corporate and employee communications business. But I've also, all through that time, all through that career, I was always writing magazine and newspaper articles, and I was always working on books.
Now, I've got to ask you, did you ever, because this is a great question for someone who wrote that much and all day long and then came home and wrote for fun, if you will. Did you ever get writer's block, and how did you get out of it?
I don't think writer's block really exists. I think it's a term somebody made up when they went through a period of time when something just didn't pop into their head. I don't think that's a block. I think that's the mind's creative process of letting things germinate, letting things develop and percolate. I don't think there's a physical or emotional or mental thing that can be called writer's block. I think it's just a natural process. And all it does is give you a chance to regroup, to develop some new ideas, to try to figure out why somebody said something or did something in a story that you just wrote, and for other things to happen that you're going to put down on those pages.
Now, do you, as you said, you were writing during the day and then working on these novels and other things at night. Did that also help? Like you didn't have to just focus on one piece day after day, week after week. Did you need that sort of, okay, I'm going to write in the morning, but it's a whole different thing, and then come back to this?
Well, I think about maybe that's why I was never that successful, at least financially, as a corporate and employee communications manager, because even during the day when I had these jobs, all I would be doing is thinking about the stuff that I was writing at night. Wow. And that's what drove me. That's the center of my being. That's the core of who I am. I would always think about getting back home, having dinner with the family, relaxing a little bit, and then getting back to work on my books.
So was the memoir about Benny Bell, about Ben Sandberg, was that your first major full-length piece that wasn't written for, corporate America?
No, my very first book was called The Jewish Book of Lists
I
by,
didn't know this, the Jewish Book of Lists.
yes,
Oh,
which was
wow.
published by Citadel Press, which right after it was published, Citadel was taken over by Kensington Books. Um, and so I think that was 1998. So that was my first published book. Right after that, I wrote a book for the Jonathan David Publishing Company called Real, REEL, Real Jewish, A Century of Jewish Movies.
Yes.
Uh, and that was about the year 2000. Those were both nonfiction, obviously. And then I started getting into fiction after that.
Well, I do have to go there in terms of asking you because I thank you for I got to read these books now. What is the most Jewish movie ever made?
The most, well, probably Schindler's List. There are a lot actually. Even my book, which is all about that and lists about and talks about maybe 100 of them. There are probably about 1,000 of them in which what defines a Jewish movie.
Yeah.
To me, it's a movie in which there is at least one major character who happens to be Jewish and who is going through something that can be considered a Jewish experience, a Jewish problem, a Jewish idea, even a Jewish stereotype for that matter.
All right.
So, by that measure, maybe one out of every five movies made over the last century can be a Jewish movie,
I
particularly
remember when
when
I was in.
the fact that
Yeah. Sorry, what?
I was going to say, particularly when you consider the fact that so many writers and directors have been Jewish over the last 120 years.
Well, Hollywood was, I mean, as anti-Semites would say, Hollywood was built and run by a
Yes.
bunch of Yiddles, from MGM to all these different places. So, all right. Do you have a favorite? You mentioned the most important, best-known Jewish movie. What's your favorite Jew movie?
Well, that's exceedingly difficult to say, but although it's not the greatest movie, I have a particular liking of The Chosen only because Chaim Potok, who wrote it, is one of my favorite novelists. So
And
I
it's
have
a
a
nice
bias
job.
there just on the fact that he wrote it.
Yeah. No, the movie's very nice. They did a nice
It
job
is.
adapting
Yeah.
that movie to I know maybe you said the producers. Is that in there? I'm hoping the producers is in your book. It
It's
has to.
probably mentioned. I don't know if I give a chapter to it, but it's there.
Ah, ah. Well, anyway. All right. So that's an old book. That's a book you wrote 25 years ago called
Yes,
Real Jewish, and also the Jewish Book of Lists,
right.
which you had that in front of you too. Like, what is an example of a Jew list? Like, all things that are wrong with me today: headache, prostate, nipples hurting a little. What do you got on there?
The publisher had specifically the way the book came about was I had originally proposed to him a comedy book called Jerusalem, a Prophet Center, and it was going to be a retake on all the Bible stories as written as if I wrote them, as opposed to whoever wrote them. He didn't want that particular idea, but he said, "Oh, you're a pretty funny guy. Why don't you write us a Jewish book of lists with a little bit of an emphasis on fun and lightheartedness, and just give people something fun to read?" So the lists, there's a little bit of humor thrown in, but they are legitimate lists of Jewish writers, Jewish actors. Um, there's a section like these people are also Jews, and it's lists of porn actors, and a list of nudists, and a list of black people. All different kinds, like Jew too, TOO. I'm a
Now,
Jew.
did you include half and 1/4 and 1/8 and 1/16, as Hitler would have, Jews who were not fully Jewish?
Probably, yeah.
I was just
Yeah.
wondering. All right, so now let's get though to the fact that you are, and you talked about this on the program back when we were on the show years ago. But when did you realize that your grandpa was special, was different, that he wasn't just some guy who worked a regular job and so forth?
That's a very interesting question because I was very close to him. I saw him at least twice a month through my entire childhood, even though he lived in Brooklyn and I lived out in the suburbs on Long Island. Wasn't that easy a trip from time to time. But I saw him a lot and he was always him. I mean, I didn't know he was different. I thought all grandfathers were like that. It was only after I became a teenager and realized that other friends' grandfathers spent time in front of the TV, drinking beer, talking about sports, being kind of boring, that I realized that mine was special.
So wait,
Because
wait. How was
mine,
he when you were a kid? How was he different? What did you?
because he
I
was
bet you didn't know. Hmm?
always humming, always singing, always creating in his head, always cracking a joke, always wanting to make people laugh. Nothing ever got to him. Nothing made him sad, at least in front of me.
Yeah.
Always working on a new project, always bouncing back when a project failed, and most of them did. Um, and then when 1974 came around, and all of a sudden he was popular coast to coast because of Dr. Demento and Cousin Brucey on WNBC, that's when I said, "Wow, he's famous." I never knew that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God. Did that so did that period though change his life appreciably? He must have made a little money. He got a Vanguard recording contract. I mean, stuff happened. And
Mhm.
yet did it sort of happen to this point when it could have happened to this point?
He was able to buy a few more presents for people, but that's it. Because the core of a person does not change. People do not change. And what made Benny Bell for his entire career, which was stubbornness and paranoia, um, doggedness and determination, that stayed with him. So even though he got this recording contract from Vanguard, he still wanted to do things his own way. He still wanted to be his own producer. He still wanted to be his own arranger. He still wanted to be his own publicity guy. He still wanted to be his own distribution manager. That's the wrong way to go, but that was him. And so after the Shaving Cream success and the Shaving Cream album success, he resorted back to being the old Benny Bell, which means that there were no other successes after that.
Yeah.
And he rode on that success for the rest of his career, which to his credit, did include some television and some radio and some concerts. He toured a little bit with Weird Al and with Dr. Demento.
Yep. When
Uh,
I don't remember when was he ever on TV?
he was on the Joe Franklin show a lot. He was on something called Beyond Vaudeville, which was on MTV. Um, he was on local WNBC News a couple of times.
All right. Yeah. Because I was, well, I know, Dave, who produces this program, was
Mhm.
actually at one of the Dr. Demento concerts at the Bottom Line in New York, where he was part of the bill. And
Yep, I probably met him there that day.
I won't be so, wow,
I
many,
was
we're
I
talking
was at the bottom
35
line. Yeah.
years ago. So, but also in terms of one of the things, and I think he wasn't necessarily wrong about this, is that his recordings, I guess they're mostly from the 1950s, the classic ones, right?
1940s, 40s,
What?
40s, 1940s.
40, so from the 40s. So who was his band? Because it's instantly recognizable. He has a very, very particular sound and cadence to this klezmer-ish, but not quite. Who were those people? They're great.
They were professional musician friends of his who would work either for free or for scale or for the promise of royalties if anything sold.
Mm.
Uh, it was a bunch of the same guys all the time. Every once in a while, somebody would not be able to show up. So, through his massive connections in the industry, he would get somebody else to come to his basement studio, first on Elton Street in Brooklyn, and then in Sheepshead Bay on Avenue U. Basement studio. That's where all of his stuff was recorded. Not in big fancy recording studios in Manhattan, but in his homemade recording studio in the basement of his apartment building. That's why the sound was all often the same. Plus, he arranged everything, and that's another reason why the sound was often the same. And by the way, did you know that before the novelty stuff took hold, he was pretty well known, at least in the New York metropolitan region, as a Yiddish songwriter and composer, British composer and performer who was on Yiddish Jewish radio all through New York City in the late 30s and early 40s, more than the novelty stuff. If you do
So
some
they would have been
research,
on WEBD and places like that, and doing, because there are it was kind of a surprise to me when started getting deep into the Benny Bell discography, and you realize that there were songs that weren't novelties at all. They were just Yiddish, like Mickey Katzy kind of thing, without the comedy stuff. It was basic, klezmer or chazanah wedding things.
yes. Well, there was a lot of comedy too, but it was still Yiddish comedy. Benny Blesses the Bride and the Klezmer Trio and Moshe Pipik, all kinds of crazy Yiddish songs that if you listen to them, you could hear the love in his voice. He loved doing that stuff, but it was not a moneymaker for him. It was a passion, and he stayed by it as long as he could. The reason he went into the novelty stuff was because he happened to be a funny guy anyway, and a record company executive at RCA, by the way. I think he was a well-known guy. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Suggested to him, why don't you just try like a double entendre thing and see what happens? So even though he loved the Yiddish material, he was good at it. He was passionate about it. It drove him. You could just feel the love in his heart. He tried one record. I think maybe the first one was. I don't think it was. Oh, it was Everybody Wants My Fanny.
It's wonderful. That is a
And
great one.
it was a regional hit. It sold a lot. It was in every jukebox, in every soda shop, and every bar in Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. And so he said to himself, maybe this is a direction to go. At least it may not be my grandest passion, but it's music. It's funny. He loves music and he likes being funny. Plus, maybe I can even have enough money to give my son a bar mitzvah for once in my life. So,
Well, but the thing was, it wasn't on his own label. He got record. He put out a lot of records. So somewhere somebody was helping or funding. If it wasn't a major label, who was putting these novelty records out, especially if they were kind of sometimes hinting at naughtiness.
if you went through his entire discography, you would see about maybe almost a dozen different labels. One
Right.
called Ariel, one called. There were a whole host that obviously don't exist anymore. But to your point, it was his own label. Just like in my novel, Jackie Jester, Benny Bell went to all the established record companies to try to get deals. Everybody loved the guy, but they didn't have enough confidence in the material to make a major investment in him. So he got fed up. He got lied to. He signed contracts that turned out to be fraudulent contracts. There's a lot of the stuff that my character, Jackie Jester, goes through too. At one point, Jackie, like my grandfather Benny, decided, oh, the hell with this. I'm going to start my own label and do it on my own. And I don't have to answer to anybody. I won't lie to myself. I won't cheat myself. He started several record companies. One was called Madison Music. One was called Bell Records, not the famous Bell Records. It was before the famous Bell Records. One was called the Novelty Record Company. There were 3 or 4 Benny Bell owned and operated labels that he recorded under for the bulk of his career.
But again, it never. He sold here and there, but at that point, it didn't launch him. It didn't do what a CBS or a Columbia back in the day would have done, or
Right.
yeah, right.
But that being said, he never really did anything else. So here I am, a relatively normal, well,
Right.
debatable.
Right.
Yeah, here I am, 60, whatever, 7 years old, living in a house. My point being, whatever Benny Bell did, it was enough for him to raise a son, my father, Jerry, to grow up to be a normal guy who had a normal family, who had a normal suburban house in a suburban town on Long Island. And then he begat me, and here I am, spent my life writing. Point being, Benny Bell devoted his entire career to music under the conditions about which we just spoke. His own record label, spit and prayer, failure, up and down.
But he was able to cobble together enough of a living to have a decent suburban life.
Exactly point.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was getting at.
But how does your father feel about his dad?
A fascinating story, and maybe another novel to come based on him. As a matter of fact, I just did write a long form article, which I don't know if I'll be able to have it published anywhere, about my father. My father had a beautiful baritone, Perry Como like voice. And when he was 17, he had Jerry Bell. He took my grandfather's pseudonym, Jerry Bell, in his orchestra. And he could have probably tried to do something with his life in music, but he grew up basically in poverty because of my grandfather's decisions. And he knew what the industry was like. He knew that my grandfather was cheated and lied to and that he had a tough time. He made a conscious decision somewhere along the line. I'm not going into the entertainment industry at all. He was mechanically inclined. He didn't do very well in school because not that he wasn't smart, but he didn't apply himself. Maybe because back then he thought he would go into music and he didn't have to learn algebra. But anyway, he decided to go into air conditioning and heating. And he was a contractor. He ended up owning the company on Long Island, one of Long Island's most well-established contractors for home comfort. And he completely avoided the entertainment industry at all costs.
Do you think he regretted that later in life, or he had a decent life and,
Yeah, very decent life.
music, you go listen on the weekend?
Yeah, he maintained his interest in music. He was always listening to music. He was always singing, just like his father always sang. He enjoyed the entertainment industry, but from afar, as a viewer, as a listener. So I don't think he regretted, because his family was a good family. He had a loving marriage. He and my mother were not only marriage partners but best friends, and they depended on each other. And it was a comfortable life. It was a nice little house. It was a good existence. I don't think he regretted it at all.
Now, let me ask you, you wrote the book on your grandpa. You wrote Grandpa Had a Long One.
Right.
You figure, they always say, well, you've written the play about this thing. That's cathartic. Now you move on to other things. And yet, something keeps straight. You just wrote a long form piece about him again. And your novel, Jackie Jester, is essentially what is it that keeps bringing you back to the same overall subject?
Couple of things. Number one, I'm a great proponent in the axiom that you write what you know. That's the best, as an author. Of course, there are many authors who write about things that you cannot possibly know. People who wrote about life on Mars don't know what that's like. People who wrote about prehistoric man don't know what that's like. Oh. But you always bring in elements of yourself somewhere along.
If you find a good proctologist, he can write about life on Uranus. But just I'm sorry. Yes.
That's quite all right. I love anus jokes as much as the next guy. I know this stuff because I grew up with it, and yet there's still always more to tell that you can't tell in just one piece.
So what is it about Jackie Jester that gets at something about Benny Bell that the biography you wrote, this goes deeper?
Oh, well, this takes liberties with some of the things that happened in his real life, and it takes some questions that I had as a kid about my grandfather that were never answered, and extrapolates from that. The story, some of the side stories that come out in the novel are based on little questions that popped into my head about my grandfather that I never got to ask. So therefore, the answers are fabricated, but based on what I think could have been a reality. And a novel is different from real life. It's definitely Benny. It's Benny Bell in disguise, but things happen to Jackie Jester, or Jackie Jester does some things that I don't think my grandfather may have done.
Now, let me ask, what is the actual, we should have started with this. And what is the basic overall, elevator pitch plot of Jackie Jester?
That he decided early on he was going to devote his life to comedy music, and nothing was going to get in the way, no matter what.
Well, that's okay. I think that's pretty real life. and he makes some of the same wrong decisions, and he's stubborn and so forth. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He's very stubborn. He's very paranoid. He's very goofy. He has some chance meetings with people like Harpo Marx and Frank Sinatra before he was famous, and Irving Berlin.
now
Uh,
these you made up, or these are based on things your grandpa told you? That
these are, well, my grandfather did meet Irving Berlin, but he these are basically made up.
okay. So wow. By the way, again, the name of the book is Jackie Jester. You can all buy it from Bear Manor Media. And so my other question is, let's talk about some of your other books, because what of all the bands out there, of all the other stories you can tell, what drew you to Karen Carpenter?
Oh, well, that's a fascinating story too. I had their what is essentially the second album. Most people think it's the first album, but it's the album called The Carpenters, on which Close to You and We've Only Just Begun were part of it. I had that when I was a kid. I was about 16, 15, I guess. And that was it. I played it a lot of times back then. I liked it, put it away, got into other got into Loggins and Messina and the Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan and all that stuff. And completely forgot about them for years and years and years and years and years and years. But then, when my middle daughter was moving into her own apartment during college days, the trend at the time was to take old album covers, frame them, and hang them on your wall. It was just a short-lived trend. So she asked me if she could go through mine. I said, sure. So she went through my old record collection, my old 33s, and found the Carpenters album, took the album cover, left me the record. And so I decided to listen to it again. This is years and years and years and years later. And that's when I realized, wow, this stuff is pretty interesting. The arrangements are complex. That voice, Karen's voice, is just so soothing. And I said, whatever happened to these guys? I knew nothing about them at the
Oh,
time.
you didn't know the whole story of her? Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But interestingly, my daughter Kate, when she took the album, she remembered seeing an advertisement for that Karen Carpenter television movie, and she watched it. I guess it was just on, and she watched it. It was just coincidence that she had just taken the album from me, and then this Karen Carpenter thing, which was old by that time, was on TV, and the whole anorexia thing. And she started watching it and asked me about it, and I didn't know anything about Karen Carpenter. But that's when I started to get interested in the whole story. So I started researching it just casually, not thinking I was going to write a book, not thinking that I was going to become a rabid fan, not not thinking anything. I just interested in it, I guess, as a journalist. Um, and then I started to discover some things that I just hadn't read anywhere. I started to think about things that I hadn't read anywhere, things about, well, she was probably a hell of a lot sicker than anybody's let on with emotional, I don't mean sick. I don't mean
Oh, you
mentally
mean,
ill.
oh, mental.
I mean
Oh,
emotional problems,
yeah.
emotional issues that nobody really ever got into. The anorexia is just one part of it and a small part of it. And there was the whole brother thing and the whole mother thing and the whole, is this what she wanted to do with her life thing? And what kind of personality was she? She really was a lonely clown. She was like my grandfather. She was goofy, always wanted to make people happy, no matter what was going on in her life, no matter what was going on in her life. So little by little, I started to chip away at the story, and I said, there's an article here, there's a book here, there's a radio report here, which I did for NPR on All Things Considered. On the 30th anniversary of her death, I did a piece for them. I think that's what turned into the book. And then the book turned into articles because I couldn't cover everything in the book. And then I was asked to appear on a couple of documentaries, one made by a German film crew that came to my house. I was in 2 or 3 documentaries. I had about 3 or 4 magazine articles, about 3 or 4 newspaper articles, the book, and then I was also part of Randy Schmidt's book. Randy Schmidt is the quintessential author of Karen Carpenter material. He wrote the biography of her that's considered to be the biography of Karen Carpenter. He wrote another book in which he asked a whole bunch of people who are involved in the music industry in one way or another to give their opinions on certain songs. So I was part of his book.
Oh, nice.
So all in all, I guess about half a dozen books and maybe a dozen newspaper and magazine articles and 2 or 3 documentaries.
Well, let me ask, in that book, which I have not read, but how does Richard come off? Does her brother come off okay? Is he
My book or in Randy's?
your investigation, your discovery of what went wrong? Because you mentioned, well, there's her whole brother stuff, and then there's the mother stuff. What are you hinting at?
Um, I refuse to demonize him. I think he is. It's tough to throw the word genius around so liberally, but I, I think it's justified. I think he really is a musical genius. Um, he too, I mean, DNA is very strong. So whatever DNA crept into Karen that gave her a few issues, I think a little bit crept into him with different issues, not the same ones. But he, in my opinion, has a few little personality quirks that made him a little difficult to like wholeheartedly. To give full-throated support of the guy as a musical genius without taking the genius part away. So he comes out pretty good. I think he probably may regret some of the decisions he made, although he's the type of guy to never admit that. Um, and I want to give credit where credit is due. I don't think there would be a Karen Carpenter that we'd be able to talk about had there not been a Richard Carpenter. Conversely, I don't think there would have been a Richard Carpenter to talk about if there hadn't been a Karen Carpenter either, despite his musical genius.
Well, no, he couldn't. You don't think he could have written for another artist like a Peggy Lee or?
Oh, he definitely could have, but he wouldn't have become the rich and famous guy that he did.
Right. Yeah. So what is the name again of the Carpenter book? I don't have that.
Some kind. We have it. Yes, some kind of lonely clown.
Okay, right, and that's available still on who was the publisher?
Also, Bear Mountain Media, the same company that published Jackie Jester. Yeah, and Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com, all the online booksellers. And it's not a biography, and I state that clearly in the introduction. It is a reflection, it is a reassessment, and it is an appreciation. It's not a biography of her life.
Okay, interesting. Okay, got that. Kind of the way Jackie Jester is, but your memoir of Benny Bell was kind of a biography and a reflection at the same time. I mean, I recall that having his whole life in there.
Incidentally, a little aside here, Karen Carpenter makes a brief cameo appearance in Jackie Jester. Without giving away too much,
yeah.
Jackie Jester's son ends up going into the record business, even though throughout the entire book he wasn't going to, just like my father wasn't going to, but he does. And at the end, he owns a record company, and his executive secretary is trying to set him up with Karen Carpenter, because by then it's the early 70s.
Actually, it's a great idea. It's a really cheap meal. It's like, I'll have the quarter pounder with cheese. No, just a glass of water. So one celery stick, half a celery stick. We're good. We're good. Best date ever.
Karen also shows up in a novel that I wrote a couple of years ago called Blowing in the Wind, which is about a musical prodigy growing up on Long Island in the 1960s. And he, too, gets to meet Karen Carpenter when he goes to visit Cousin Brucey at WNBC in Manhattan in the early 70s, right before the Carpenters break into national stardom. So, I don't know, somehow she pops up into so much of what I write.
There's something about Karen Carpenter. Is Karen Carpenter going to be in your next book? What are you working on now?
Oh, no, she's not. I'm just wrapping up a new novel called Remember Me to Herald Square, which is a story about a hotshot New York City newspaper reporter and a struggling young actress in New York City in 1985. They were high school sweethearts 10 years earlier in rural Ohio. And they meet up again in New York when their careers are just starting. But can they get back together again? That's the question of the novel. After all, the reporter, Michael, how far will he go for a story? And the actress, Tina, how far will she go for a part? And without giving too much away, they find their careers on an unintentional collision course.
Oh, it sounds... So I'm not going to... When do you think you'll have the final draft done and so forth?
Let's see, in about 3 hours. No, it's on its third draft, and I'm just about 2 or 3 days away from finishing that draft, and then I'll see what I'll do with it. But if there are any publishers out there, I'm here. Joel the Writer at Comcast.net. Come to me.
Joel the Writer at Comcast.net. But here's the deal. I mean, you're still writing a book, going through the time. I know you love to write. It's what you live for. But
yes.
writing without knowing it's going to be published by, well, Bear Manor. I guess Bear Manor wants something that's more directly biographical, or why
No, their matter is more entertainment related, and
this?
they're the biggest publisher of showbiz bios, showbiz backstories, and now showbiz related fiction.
Right.
Uh, and then Jackie Jester is about the record industry, so it fits. Remember Me to Herald Square is about journalism. It's not really about
It's
entertainment.
not so much about Broadway and music.
No, because she's the main character, Tina, has not done anything yet, so she's not famous. So I would love to be able to break through to one of the major publishers, the Simon and Schusters of the world and that sort of thing.
Now, but speaking of theater, you have written plays back in the
Yes.
day. I didn't even realize that. So, have you written any in recent years, or that was sort of a period you're now concentrating on fiction and nonfiction?
No, I've written about 5 or 6 full-length plays, and a whole bunch of short plays, one acts and 10-minute plays, which is a movement in and of itself. It's the shorter ones that have come to life on stage. One was called The Bittersweet Ballad of Bobby Blue, which was debuted at a theater out here in Connecticut a couple of years ago. And one of 6 of my short 10-minute plays were put together in an evening called 6 Tens from a 50 that were performed in New York City at the Beckman Theater, the Actors Theater, a couple of years ago, and that was fun. And I'm still writing plays every once in a while. I'm writing one now called The History of Comedy, which is going to debut. I started my own little theater company, my own little community theater and performing arts group called Playhouse 44 here in Avon, Connecticut. And we're going to perform The History of Comedy in August at Avon High School.
Oh, I had no idea. You run this theater company.
Yeah.
How many years have you been doing that?
1.5.
Oh,
Just started it.
so just with friends you knew were talented and you knew you could get a venue, or how did you? I mean,
I've
that's
wanted to do something like this for years and years and years and years. There can never be too much theater. It's something that I enjoy. I thought it would be an outlet for me as I got older to socialize a little bit more and to express myself a little bit more. Maybe somewhere down the line to debut one of my own full-length plays. And just to have something to do and to give back to the community, especially in this post-pandemic days when people are looking for something to do. Because in our mission statement, one of our goals is to be able to provide theater and performing arts at extremely affordable prices. If somebody has to say, no, I can't go see that, it's too much, then it's not worth doing at all. Because what's the point? I mean, that's why we're all amateurs, we're all volunteers. Our ticket prices are never more than $10, and some are $8, and some are free, with just a suggested donation to help fund our 501c3 not-for-profit organization. Yeah, we're not for profit.
Are you afraid of running out of grant money now? I mean, with everything that's going on, or
we've been doing pretty good with a couple of local donations and with a grant from a government organization here in town and from ticket sales. And it's not that we have a whole hell of a lot of money, but we purposely put on things that don't cost a lot of money to mount. They're all, and nobody gets paid. And so we're doing okay with the time being.
Mit Mazel. So again, the name of that show that's happening in August in Avon, Connecticut is your show?
Well, the actual full title is going. I just call it The History of Comedy because it's easier. But the actual full title is going to be something like the not quite complete history of comedy and tragedy without the tragedy, something like that.
Wait a minute, so you're still working on it? You haven't? It's not.
Yeah.
Oh my!
I'll probably be done tonight, and then there's a lot of editing involved, and then the mounting of it is going to be a logistical nightmare that I'm looking forward to.
You're directing?
No, I'm not going to direct it.
Oh, interesting. So are you going to be? Do you act with this company, or you just write?
There's going to be so many parts because we're going to do actual scenes from comedy throughout the years. We're going to do scenes from Dick Van Dyke Show and I Love Lucy and the Who's on First routine and stand-up comics, George Carlin, Richard Pryor. So I'll probably take one small part somewhere along the line just for fun.
Well, if you ever need anybody to be Jackie Mason, you just give me a call. I can do this for you. I can be up there. I can talk about Starbucks from all that. Anyway, we have been talking with Bang. No, not Bang. I was going to say Bang Samberg. No, Joel, a chip off the old block, if you will. Please go find his books. Really, the best way to, because you mentioned so many books now. What is your website again?
Well, my website is still the website from when I was doing corporate communications, so that's not going to help much.
Oh,
But I would suggest if you just go to Amazon and type in my name in the search bar, all of my books will pop up.
all the books, including Real Jewish, Jewish Book of Lists, Blowing in the Wind, Almost Like Praying, and now
Some Kind of Lonely Clown, and now Jackie Jester, and Grandpa Had a Long One. Yeah, all of them should pop up, and if they don't, just try to find them because that's what you're supposed to do.
but Jackie Jester is the brand new one. Hold it up one more time if we can see it from Bear Manor Media. Bye, Joel Samberg. Joel, I want to wish you much, much more writing, much success. Break a leg in the theater. This is so exciting.
Thank you.
And
You are wonderful. You're a great guy. I love talking to you. You're fun. You're educated. You're well spoken. You love. I can, just like my grandfather, I can see you have a love of life. You just want to make people happy. You just want to inform them and entertain them and educate them, and I appreciate that more than I can say.
wow, I'm tearing up a little bit. Hold on there. Thank you, Joel Samberg. Happy Shabbos to you and shalom.
Thank you. Be peace and health and happiness.